The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak, its gnarled limbs clawing at the sky as if pleading for release. The clearing was a desolate place, forgotten by time, where the grass grew thin and the earth smelled of damp rot. 5 years ago, Elias Kane had stood here, his breath steaming in the frigid dusk, a length of coarse rope in his calloused hands. His dog, a loyal mutt named Sable, had whimpered softly, her amber eyes wide with confusion as he looped the rope around her neck and tethered her to the tree. Her 3 pups, barely weaned, squirmed in a burlap sack at her side, their tiny yips muffled but piercing. Elias's face had been a mask of stone, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. He didn't look back as he turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the frost-crusted ground, disappearing into the lengthening shadows of the forest. The town of Cold Hollow had whispered about it for weeks. Elias, the reclusive widower who lived at the edge of the woods, had always been strange. His silences too heavy, his gaze too sharp, but this was different. He bound his pooch and her pups to a tree and took off, they said, shaking their heads over mugs of ale at the tavern. Some called it cruelty, others madness. A few, the older ones who knew the forest's secrets, said nothing, their eyes darting to the tree-lean as if expecting something to emerge. But Elias was gone, and the forest swallowed the story as it had swallowed him. 5 years passed, and the oak stood unchanged, its bark scarred where the rope had bitten into it. The clearing was quieter now, the air thicker, as if the earth itself held its breath. No one ventured there anymore. Hunters avoided it, their dogs whining and pulling back from the path. Children dared each other to approach but never crossed the clearing's edge. They spoke of ghosts, of eyes in the dark, of a low growl that wasn't quite animal. The town had moved on, but the forest remembered. It was on a November evening, when the sky burned red and the wind carried the scent of snow, that Clara Wren arrived in Cold Hollow. She was a stranger, her coat patched and her boots worn thin from miles of walking. Her hair, the color of rusted iron, was tied back, and her eyes, sharp, green, and restless, seemed to see more than they should. She carried a leather satchel slung over her shoulder, its contents rattling softly with each step. The townsfolk watched her from their windows, curious but wary. She asked no questions, offered no explanations, and took a room at the inn without a word about her purpose. Clara's first night in Cold Hollow was restless. She lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, her mind turning over the stories she'd heard in distant towns. Stories of a man who'd abandoned his dogs in a cursed wood, of a clearing where nothing grew right. She'd come for answers, though she wasn't sure what she'd find. Her satchel held tools and journals, maps marked with cryptic symbols, and a single photograph, faded and creased, of a man with hollow eyes and a dog at his side. Elias Kane. The next morning, she set out for the clearing. The forest was a labyrinth of shadow and sound, the trees leaning close as if to whisper secrets. Clara moved with purpose, her steps sure despite the uneven ground. She'd tracked stranger things than this, lights in the sky, voices in the deep, but something about this place set her nerves on edge. The air grew colder as she neared the clearing, the light dimmer, though the sun was high. When she stepped into the open, she stopped short. The oak loomed before her, its trunk blackened as if scorched, though no fire had touched it. The rope was gone, but the bark bore deep grooves where it had been. The ground around the tree was bare, not a blade of grass or speck of moss. Clara's breath caught as she noticed something else. Tracks, fresh and deep, circling the tree. Not human, not animal either, at least not any she recognized. They were too large, too deliberate, the claws too long and sharp. Her hand drifted to the knife at her belt, but she didn't draw it. Not yet. She knelt, examining the tracks, her fingers brushing the earth. It was cold, unnaturally so, as if the ground itself were frozen from below. Her satchel clunked as she set it down, and she pulled out a small glass vial filled with a shimmering powder. She sprinkled it over the tracks, murmuring words too low to catch, and the powder glowed faintly, a pale blue that pulsed like a heartbeat before fading. Clara's eyes narrowed. "You're still here," she whispered, though to whom or what she couldn't say. That night, back at the inn, Clara pored over her journals by candlelight. The pages were filled with sketches of symbols, fragments of old texts, and notes in her tight, slanted script. She'd been chasing Elias Kane for years. Not for him, but for what he'd left behind. The stories all pointed to the same thing. Something had happened in that clearing, something that wasn't just a man abandoning his dogs. The photograph lay on the table, Elias's face staring up at her, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Sable's eyes seemed to glow, even in the faded image. Clara traced the dog's outline with her finger, her mind racing. The next day, she returned to the clearing, this time with a small recorder and a bundle of sage. She burned the sage, letting the smoke curl into the air, and spoke into the recorder, her voice steady but low. Day 2. The tracks are fresher today, deeper. The air feels heavy, like it's watching. No sign of the rope or the dogs, but the tree. She paused, glancing up at the oak. Its branches seemed to twist in ways they hadn't yesterday, as if reaching for something. She shook her head and continued. The tree feels alive, not in a natural way. Something's wrong here. As she spoke, a sound cut through the silence. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Clara froze, her hand on her knife. The growl grew louder, vibrating in her chest, and then stopped as suddenly as it began. She waited, her heart pounding, but nothing moved. The clearing was still, too still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. She backed away slowly, her eyes scanning the trees, and didn't turn her back until she was well into the forest. That night, the dreams came. Clara saw the clearing, but it was different, vibrant, alive, the grass lush and green. Sable stood beneath the oak, her pups at her side, their eyes glowing like embers. Elias was there, too, but he wasn't alone. Shadows moved around him, tall and thin, their forms flickering like smoke. They spoke in a language Clara couldn't understand, their voices sharp and discordant. Elias knelt, his hands digging into the earth, and when he looked up, his eyes were black, endless, like voids. Sable howled, and the shadows laughed, and Clara woke gasping, her hands clutching the sheets. She didn't sleep again that night. By dawn, she was back in the clearing, her satchel heavier with new tools. A compass that didn't point north, a stone carved with runes, a vial of something dark and viscous. She was done waiting. Whatever Elias had left here, whatever he'd bound to that tree, she would find it. She knelt at the base of the oak, her fingers tracing the grooves in the bark, and whispered, "Show me." The ground trembled, just a faint shudder at first, then stronger, until the earth seemed to groan beneath her. Clara stumbled back, her eyes wide as the soil around the tree began to crack, splitting like dry skin. Something was rising, something that smelled of iron and decay. The air grew thick, the light dimmed, and from the shadows of the forest, eyes appeared, amber, glowing, unblinking. Not one pair, but dozens, circling the clearing, watching her. Clara's hand tightened on her knife, but she didn't run. She'd come too far for that. "I'm here," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "What did he do to you?" The eyes didn't move, but a sound filled the clearing. A chorus of growls, low and resonant. The shape that rose from the cracked earth was neither beast nor shadow, but something caught between. It was massive, its form rippling like liquid obsidian, yet its edges blurred as if it couldn't decide whether to exist. Amber eyes burned within it, not just two but countless, shifting and multiplying like stars in a night sky gone mad. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her knife trembling in her hand, but she stood her ground. The air was thick with the stench of iron and rot, and the ground beneath her feet pulsed as if alive. The chorus of growls swelled, a primal hymn that seemed to shake the trees, and the eyes in the forest closed in, their glow casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. "Who are you?" Clara's voice was a blade, sharp and steady, cutting through the din. The shape paused, its form shuddering, and for a moment, she thought she saw Sable's face within it, her muzzle, her ears, her anguished eyes. Then it was gone, swallowed by the writhing mass. A voice answered, not from the shape but from everywhere, a low, resonant growl that vibrated in her bones. "Bound," it said, the word heavy with sorrow and rage. "Bound by his will, bound by his blood." Clara's mind raced, her eyes flicking to the satchel at her side. The photograph of Elias and Sable burned in her memory. His hollow gaze, her loyal stare. She'd pieced together enough from her journals, from the whispers of old texts and forgotten lore. Elias hadn't just abandoned his dogs. He'd done something worse, something ancient, something that had torn a hole in the world right here in this clearing. She reached into her satchel, her fingers closing around the rune-carved stone. Its surface was warm, almost alive, and she held it aloft, her voice rising. "Show me what he did." The shape lunged, not at her but at the tree. Its form crashed against the oak, and the bark split with a sound like breaking bone. The ground shook again, harder now, and Clara stumbled, catching herself against a root. From the split in the tree, a light poured out, not bright but sickly, a green that pulsed like an infected wound. The shape howled, and the eyes in the forest answered, their growls merging into a single, deafening roar. Clara's ears rang, but she didn't falter. She thrust the stone forward, its runes glowing faintly, and shouted words she'd read in a crumbling book years ago. Words she barely understood but felt in her core. The light from the tree dimmed, and the shape recoiled, its form shrinking, condensing, until it was no longer a mass but a figure. Sable or something like her, standing tall, her fur black as midnight, her eyes blazing. "You're her," Clara whispered, her heart pounding. "You're Sable." The figure tilted its head, its gaze piercing. "Not only," it said, its voice a chorus now, layered with others, high and soft, like the pups, deep and guttural, like something older. "He bound us. He gave us to the earth, to the old ones." The figure stepped closer, its claws leaving scorch marks on the ground. "He wanted power. He paid with us." Clara's mind spun. The stories hadn't lied, but they hadn't told the truth, either. Elias hadn't just tied his dogs to a tree and left. He'd performed a ritual, something dark and forbidden, something that had twisted Sable and her pups into this. She glanced at the cracked earth, at the tree still oozing that sickly light. "Where is he?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. The figure's eyes darkened. "Gone. Taken. The old ones do not give without taking." It gestured to the tree, and Clara saw it now. Marks carved into the bark, not just from the rope but symbols, ancient and jagged, pulsing with that same green light. He thought he could control them. He was wrong. Clara's hand tightened on the stone. She'd come to find Elias, to unravel the mystery of the clearing. But this was bigger than she'd imagined. The old ones, beings she'd only read about in fragments, entities that lived in the spaces between, hungry for offerings, for blood. She knelt, pulling the vial of dark liquid from her satchel. It was blood, not hers but something she'd bartered for in a town 3 months back, from a woman who claimed to know the old ways. She uncorked it, the smell sharp and metallic, and poured it onto the ground. "I'm not him," she said, her voice firm. "I'm here to set you free." The figure froze, its eyes narrowing. The growls in the forest quieted, and for a moment the clearing was silent, the air so still it felt like glass. Then the ground shuddered again, and the tree groaned, its branches twisting upward as if in pain. The figure lunged, not at Clara but at the tree, its claws tearing into the bark. The green light flared, and Clara felt a pull, like a current dragging her under. She gripped the stone, chanting the words again, louder now, her voice echoing in the clearing. The figure howled, its form flickering. Sable one moment, a writhing mass the next, then something else entirely, something with too many limbs, too many eyes. The earth split wider, and Clara saw it. A void beneath the tree, a darkness that wasn't empty but alive, pulsing, reaching. The old ones. She threw the stone into the void, and the air screamed, a sound that clawed at her mind. The figure roared, its form collapsing, and for a moment Clara saw them. Sable and her pups, whole and alive, their eyes soft, their fur warm. Then they were gone, swallowed by the light. When the ground stilled, the clearing was quiet. The tree stood bare, its bark no longer glowing, its branches still. The eyes in the forest were gone, the air light again, the smell of rot replaced by damp earth and pine. Clara's legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, her hands shaking. The satchel lay open beside her, its contents scattered, journals, tools, the empty vial. She didn't know if she'd freed them or damned them, if the old ones had taken them back or let them go. She stayed in Cold Hollow for 3 more days, searching the forest for signs. But the clearing remained empty, the tracks gone, the tree just a tree. The townsfolk watched her leave, their whispers softer now, their eyes less wary. Clara didn't look back as she walked away, her satchel lighter, her mind heavier. She'd found answers, but not the ones she'd wanted. Elias was gone, taken by something older than the forest, older than the town. Sable and her pups were free, or so she hoped, but the cost lingered in her dreams. Amber eyes, a chorus of growls, a darkness that watched and waited. Years later, in a different town, a different forest, Clara would hear a story of a clearing where nothing grew, where the wind carried a low, mournful howl. She'd pause, her hand brushing the photograph in her pocket, now more faded, more fragile, and she'd wonder if she'd truly ended it, or if the binding was never hers to break.